For some of you who came in late, and just for the people on YouTube, I'm going to share the screensaver for a moment. And mm, yeah, let's get to it for a minute. A little bit about the screensaver. Uh, the figure on the right is actually a sculpture in Lake Geneva, Switzerland, and it's called Melancholy, which was one of the older words for sadness or grief, and sits on the edge of Lake Geneva there. It says quite a lot about sadness. It says quite a lot about grief, just without using any words. I think most of you recognize that emptiness that you feel, maybe empty of hope. It's 2025, and we're still bombing people. We still think war is going to be something positive that will lead to peace. Now, on the left is an image of a painting that I picked up in my centering prayer work. For me, it's an icon of grace, the grace that radiates from the infinite love of the universe. And it says a lot without saying words. And the more I meditate on these two pictures side by side, the more similarities and differences I see in uh, the interrelation of both grace and grieving. And that's what I really want to get to today. So just so the folks can see this image and get back to it if you want on YouTube later. Oops. There we go. Back. Uh, you know, even before I went to sleep before there was an announcement about what was going on in the Middle East. I think it was like 10 o'clock at night. I was asleep by that time. But when I was preparing this all week and yesterday, I started out with talking about millions of Americans who had their spirits raised by the 2,000 plus No Kings demonstration across the United States last weekend. Uh, and that was sort of, it was still something that I could feel in my body. It felt good to see 5 or 6 million Americans saying they don't agree with the force and violence that not only was being demonstrated in Los Angeles, but it's all over uh, the country. And so I don't blame you. If you think it's a little bit counterintuitive to launch a two-part exploration of the grace and grieving. Now it seems obviously maybe a little bit more intuitive because of what happened, how we've escalated the war, put more people at risk, including our own servicemen. Um, Now, some of you here were here for the first session that we did. That we didn't we did 3 or 4 heart-to-heart meetings before my middle son Jared convinced me to tape them and then put them up on YouTube. And so some of you were here for the first poem I recited in our very first heart-to-heart session over 4 years ago. And that was during the darkness of COVID, the COVID-19 epidemic. We're all, most of us were just hanging out in our houses. I just wonder if those of you who were there, do you remember the first poem that I started with more than 4 years ago? Uh, Later in the talk, I hope you'll see why I began Heart to Heart with this poem so long ago and why I'm choosing to begin our exploration of grief with it right now. So here's the poem. You'll recognize it because it's pretty famous. One that I have tacked up on the cave of my heart. Never know when you need it. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense when we're in this field, this unified field of love. That was written in the 13th century by Islamic mystic that we call Rumi. That was his nickname. Yes, he was born in the empire, the Roman Empire, part in Turkey, and so they said he's from Rum. He became Rumi. Yeah. I'm glad to be starting that today. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense when we're in this field, this unified field of love. For Rumi and his branch of Sufism, the heart is the unified field of love. The sacred heart, as we call it in Catholicism, the heart of hearts, as they call it in the Sufi tradition, the heart of hearts, the deep heart, is the unified field of love, and it's in us. It's in every one of us. So it's good to start, especially if you're going to go into grieving, working with the dark material in everybody's life. It's good to start with a radiant image, that image on the left, the image of the grace of infinite love is what Rumi is summoning there. And it's a game changer when you realize not only is it accessible all the time, but it's actually part of you, that it's put in from the very beginning. It's there. So we find ourselves in a dark time again. Angry men in the White House, they really believe, or at least are practicing on this basis, that empathy, feeling for another, our whole talk, brilliant talk last week by Emily Vickers, was on Tonglen, which is how it's a kind of heart to heart practice where you feel the hurt in somebody else, you empathize with it, and you want to send some sense of relief. But these guys, Stephen Miller and a bunch, they believe that empathy is a poison that is destroying our country. And that's why all the performative cruelty, violence, it's focused on the treatment of immigrants right now. But, last night, a terrific amount of violence on residents of Iran. How would you feel if some country did that to any of our nuclear reactors? And how many people in our country would be killed? Would you think that was okay? Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you sort of violates that rule. So I want to, first of all, have a couple questions to follow. What is underneath this anger and cruelty and darkness, and even this belief that empathy is poison? What is underneath this anger, cruelty, and violence, and this fear of empathy? And what can we do about it? Those are a couple of good questions. Underneath the anger, not all anger, but a lot of anger, most anger perhaps, is a deep sadness. Let that sink in. Now, sometimes anger is justified when people are threatened, when borders are crossed, boundaries are crossed, and people you love or yourself are threatened. So anger, in that, but this is not it. Iran had done nothing to us. As a matter of fact, uh, they didn't even have weapons grade uranium. So most really anger is underneath it is a deep sadness. Life is bittersweet, and at times it disappoints us, it hurts us, and saddens all of us. I mean, we all live in that world. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things happen. You know, it's just life. It's bittersweet. The sweetness of a group like this, I haven't really ever experienced uh, being in a group that this was just this radiant with grace, this sweet. And then all around us, bitter things have. Bittersweet's the only word in the English language that connects two opposite, bitter and sweet. It's in other, it's also in Dutch. I asked my Dutch Zen master, do you have a word in Dutch that's like bittersweet? He said, oh, bettenzoet, bittersweet, which is quite an interesting world, but it's somehow bitter and sweet are not two. People wonder what this sign over my left shoulder is, not two. Well, life is not dual. It can hold both the bitter and the sweet. You have to face both the bitter and sweet. And at times you'll be disappointed, you'll be hurt, and you'll be in deep sadness, just like the two images side by side. Now, given that fact, we got options. We can react to the sadness with anger and therefore transmit it. So you can react and transmit the energy, not in sadness, but if you don't if you react to it, you might come out with anger and violence to ourselves and others. Uh, it's just it's just a fact of us. Psychologists have been tracking this for a while. That when teenagers get sad, uh, the majority of males turn it into anger against others. These are most of our in our culture. These shooters who come into schools and WalMarts and almost everywhere and hurt others. Uh, Adolescent and teenage girls tend to cut themselves. They take it out on themselves. So that's what happens when you react to sadness. Now, we all have a choice. We can respond and transform the sadness. So this is sort of spirituality 101. Whatever you don't transform, you will transmit to yourselves or others. I mean, you can't get away from that rule. If you've been in the spirituality game for a while, it sinks in. Whatever you don't transform, you will transmit. And so the soul practice of transforming sadness, and it is a soul practice, cannot be done with the mind. We'll talk about it more next week on part two, and we'll link in. Uh, we'll look at all the five categories of sadness. A great grief master calls them the five gates of grief. We're working with obviously working with two of them today, and I want to just focus on the most obvious one. And it is a soul practice. So, one of the reasons people are here probably is that we practice together and we share practices, just as last week Emily reminded us of the great practice Tibetan practice of Tonglen. So this soul practice is called grieving. That's what it means to transform sadness uh, into joy, peace, uh, justice, love. It's a key thing. And since we're working with really always, well, we're always working with the first gate of grief, which is personal loss, your personal things that you've lost, and then your own wounds that have happened. Okay, we're always where that's the first gate. That's the obvious. When people think of grief, they think of, well, some family member dies, or maybe a relationship ends, or all the way down to losing something, something losing your walking stick, losing your watch. Yeah. So that's the obvious one. Well, we're living right now with the second gate of grief, or another gate of grief, which is sorrow of the world, big picture things that are going on in this culture when you're losing your democratic institutions day by day, being hollowed out. Remember the hollow picture of that melancholy statue. Things that, as a teacher for 30 years, and I'm still teaching, but in the classroom for 30 years, there was a kind of real grief when they're trying to destroy the Department of Education, something that I believe in. So since loss and sadness is our most human experience, now here's another question. Here we are, we got to ask this. The reason we're having today's and next week's sort of in service on grieving, practice on grieving, it's sort of remarkable since loss and sadness is our most common human experience. Let that sink in. Who has not lost something? And when my grandmother died at 96, everybody thinks it's great to live to be 96 or 100. But think about all that you've lost. Most of your friends have gone from this life, you see. So loss and sadness is our most common human experience. My question is, why have most of us never had even 1 second of formal instruction in grieving? Think about your school experience. I went all the way to graduate school. So 17, 18 years in classrooms. I never had 1 second of formal instruction in grieving. Why is that? It's malpractice. Well, I taught my junior high students about grief, which they already were experiencing. They just didn't know what to do with it. Now, this is a quote from Richard Rohr, which does give you some insight into why nobody teaches about grieving. You can't teach what you don't know, and why is this the great untouched experience? Richard Rohr says you need to be bathed, interesting word. You need to be bathed in the assurance of infinite love to risk the path of vulnerability and grieving. Listen to that again. He says you need to be bathed in the assurance of infinite love. You have to be soaked in it to risk the path of vulnerability and grieving. I think he's right. And that was not probably not most people's experience. Now, if you go on a spiritual path, Rumi is an example of one of the best spiritual paths, one of the great spiritual teachers. His whole poem there, I'll meet you in that field of infinite love. But it does explain why none of us have been trained in the spiritual art of grieving explicitly in our school days because most those people didn't know what to do with it. Nobody trained them. So in the bigger picture, when we're trying to spiritual practice writ large is trying to take us from a kind of shattered, partial, wounded existence into healing, into becoming whole. Uh, the art of grieving is of central importance to our journey to healing, into wholeness. Now, next Sunday, we'll look at all five types of grief because there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of sadness, a lot of grieving we're doing where we're not even aware of it. I mean, when your mother dies, your father dies, or your wife dies, or your husband dies, you can't avoid it. You're that statue there. You know, you're just racked with sadness, but we don't often know what to do with it. Today, because of what happened last night and generally what's happening in our country, we can work with two types of grief. But I would, our personal losses and wounds, but also the wounds, the sorrow of the world. Being in a country that's losing its democracy, being in a world where wars like this are still happening. So you maybe work with those two or one of the other three that you never know what life's giving you and what really is there to work with. Now I want to bring up an icon here that we often use, but I hope that you will see it in a different light today. Yeah, most of you know this icon if you've been here. Uh, this is the field that Rumi's talking about. When you talk about going into sort of a hot tub of infinite love and grace, well, this gives you a view of that. And the interesting thing is, it's in you. We just have to leave the surface of things uh, and drop down into it, just the way you have to ease your way into a hot tub. Okay. And so I'm going to leave this up because this is it's a necessity if you're going to do this kind of work and deal with disappointment and loss and sorrow. You have to have this, as Roy would say, this. You have to be bathed in infinite love, and so this is a reminder that that is in you, and we can actually. This is all meditation is always a journey within. You're going deeper into yourself. It's not primarily a journey outward. We're going into to find the field in us, the energy field in us of infinite love and compassion, peace, rest and natural great peace. It's in you. It isn't outside most days. Yeah, okay. So we're going to leave that up. And so that's an icon of Rumi's field. Now, I want to remind you of something that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, a really wise statement by Thomas Merton. And he will give us a hint of how to, all right, when we just settle down into this inward field of grace, then what? Well, Merton said this, and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. He said, one of the strange things of the contemplative life is that in it, you don't sit down to solve problems. You bear with them until they solve themselves. Now, how that works with grieving, he says, I would say we don't sit down to grieve losses. We simply sit down and bear with them. We listen to them with the ear of the heart. The Tibetans and the Trappists, especially the Trappists that I trained with for 20 years, when my spiritual director, Father Gregory, was training me, That's the core of what contemplation means, to listen with the ear of the heart. It's different than the human ear. Okay. So to do grief today, whether it's about something personal, whether it's about this larger macro uh, sorrow of the world that we're living in, uh, we sit down and just bear with it. Sometimes you really know what you're sitting with. You've had a rupture in a relationship with your partner or your kids. We're seeing a rupture in democracy now. It depends. Sometimes you know what you're sitting with, but you might not today. That's okay. We'll sit down anyway, and we'll listen with the ear of the heart. And then we allow the grace of infinite love to gently dissolve and heal those wounds. Yeah, so you're not solving a problem. You're not even solving grief. You're dissolving it. It's only dissolved by this sitting down and allowing. Key word here, you're allowing grace to gently dissolve and heal them. That's the process. Um, all of the most of what I've said today is I'll send the notes out to most of you get them. But if you are new and you'd like to notes, just send me an email at looseleafhall@gmail.com and I'll add you to the list.